Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is November 22nd, 2023, the day before Thanksgiving here in the United States. Professor John Mearsheimer joins us now. Professor, I know most people don't like to work at this time of day on the day before Thanksgiving, but my personal gratitude, as well as that of our audience, for your sharing your time with us at this time. Thanks for joining us. I want to talk to you about a field that I know fascinates you because you've written and lectured about it extensively, and that's China. And I want to ask you about China's interest in or involvement in the Israeli Gaza conflagration. And then we're going to play some clips from State Department spokesman on this and from President Xi himself. But generally speaking, given your understanding of the hegemonic forces, using a Mearsheimer phrase, what, if any, is China's interest in the conflagration in Gaza?
Well, I think that it's an opportunity for the Chinese to make diplomatic hay. The Chinese have been basically arguing that the United States is principally responsible for the disaster in Gaza because the United States assumed almost full responsibility for creating a two-state solution. And it failed. It failed miserably. And the end result is that we have this conflict. So the United States is to blame. And furthermore, if you look at how the United States is behaving since the conflict broke out, it's joined at the hip with the Israelis, and therefore it is guilty for what sorts of crimes the Israelis are creating in Gaza. So the United States is the bad guy in the Chinese story. And this is a story that resonates all around the global South and even in large chunks of the Western world. It's a very powerful story that the Chinese are telling. So diplomatically, it's manna from heaven for them. And for us, it's a disaster. I mean, this situation gets worse by the week for us.
Here's Matt Miller, Cut 5, Chris, who's the spokesperson for the State Department, waxing eloquently about China. I want your thoughts on this, but I invite you to the last phrase that he uses, which is almost laughable: the indispensability of the United States. But here he is.
We would welcome China playing a constructive role in the Middle East. The secretary has made this clear personally in his conversations with Wang Yi. I called Wang Yi on our first trip to the Middle East and said if there's anything they can do to prevent the conflict from widening in terms of using the lines of communications that they have available to countries in the Middle East, we would welcome that. He followed up on that conversation with Wang Yi is here, and they had a very productive conversation about it. To the larger question, though, I would say one of the things that we heard repeatedly from every party with which we engaged on our last trip was the indispensability of the United States.
I mean, that can't be serious that other countries have said to his boss, Secretary Blinken, that the United States is indispensable. That's a myth from George W. Bush to Joe Biden, and maybe even before George W.
I think Madeleine Albright is the person who made that phrase famous.
There you go.
And President Biden has recently repeated it. It's a phrase that enrages the Chinese and it enrages the Russians. And the last time I looked at a map, both of those countries are in Asia. And those are the countries that he's talking about the United States engaging with. And there are all sorts of other countries who do not like that rhetoric at all because it conveys American superiority. But just getting back to the question of how the United States thinks about China in the Middle East and China getting involved in the Gaza conflict, I think except for purposes of trying to prevent escalation, with which Mr. Miller referred to. If the Chinese could help us prevent this conflict in the Middle East from escalating, we would appreciate that for sure. But otherwise, we don't want the Chinese involved in the Middle East at all. We want it all for ourselves. The United States wants to be the dominant power diplomatically, economically, and militarily in that region of the world. And what's happening as a result of the Gaza conflict is it's becoming extremely difficult for us to maintain that position because we've created an opening for the Chinese and for the Russians. And unsurprisingly, they both have jumped into it.
Here's President Xi Jinping yesterday. He obviously did not get the message from Matthew Miller. The root cause of the Palestinian-Israeli situation is the fact of the right of the Palestinian people to statehood. Their right to existence and their right of return have long been ignored. I have emphasized on many occasions that the only viable way to break the cycle of Palestinian-Israeli conflict lies in the two-state solution, in the restoration of the legitimate national rights of Palestine and the establishment of an independent state of Palestine. There can be no sustainable peace and security in the Middle East without a just solution for Palestine. China calls for early convening of an international peace conference, that is more authoritative, to build international consensus for peace and work toward an early solution to the question of Palestine that is comprehensive and sustainable. Wow.
Well, I mean, it's very clear that many people in the West, including every president since Jimmy Carter, have argued that it's imperative to get a two-state solution. They have been saying for a long time what Xi Jinping is now saying. I think most people that I know, most people I hang around with, believe that if there's any hope of putting an end to the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, there has to be a Palestinian state as well as a Jewish state. But the problem is that the United States has been largely unable to use the right word, it's been unable to coerce the Israelis who are reluctant at best to accept a two-state solution to move in that direction. Presidents have tried, but they've not been able to really exercise much coercive leverage against the Israelis, in large part because the Israel lobby, Israel's hardline supporters in the United States, have made it impossible for us to put pressure on Israel. And of course, the Israeli government now has no interest whatsoever in a two-state solution, and there's no way that Joe Biden is going to put any pressure on the Israelis to move toward a two-state solution, especially after what happened on October 7th. So in effect, there is no solution to this problem.
Do we care what President Xi Jinping thinks about the Israeli-Gaza conflagration?
We care because diplomatically he's saying all the right things. I think that most American policymakers understand at this point in time we're not going to have a two-state solution anytime soon, if ever. I think they understand that. But they also understand that from Xi Jinping's point of view and from Putin's point of view, it makes eminently good sense to advertise the fact that they are in favor of a two-state solution. They are in favor of helping the Palestinians. They are in favor of shutting this conflict down. And it's the Americans who are principally responsible, of course, along with the Israelis, for the failure to achieve that outcome, which is the right outcome for creating a peaceful situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
I don't want to spend too much time parsing his words, but what do you think he meant by an authoritative body? Is he talking about the Security Council of the United Nations or some other entity that would coerce the Netanyahu government to begin talks for this two-state solution?
Well, I would imagine he's talking about the Security Council, and I wouldn't be surprised, if at some point the Chinese and the Russians try to go to the Security Council and embarrass the United States by forcing it to veto some sort of resolution to move toward a two-state solution. But, there's no real authoritative body that matters here. What matters here is that the Americans have to find themselves in a position where they can put pressure on Israel to move towards a two-state solution. But that's just not in the cards. And the end result, again, is that this one is just not going to be solved.
How diplomatically regressive, if that's the right word, is claiming that the Chinese diplomats referred to the United States as indispensable? I mean, that is farcical. No one would believe that.
No, the Chinese certainly don't believe that at all. The Chinese think that the United States is the principal threat to global stability. They have no use for American foreign policy. And the idea that we're the indispensable nation just rubs them the wrong way, because we're saying, in effect, that we are superior to them. Remember, the rest of Madeleine Albright's famous quote is, "We are the indispensable nation. We stand taller and we see further." If you think about those words, we stand taller, we see further. We're superior to everybody else. Even if you think that, you shouldn't say it.
Right. As you may know, someone spray painted. I mean, this is an act of vandalism and an act of graffiti, which I condemn, but the words are significant. On one of those pillars on the fence outside the White House, Genocide Joe. And Admiral Kirby responded in a rather animated way about this. I'd like you to listen to what he said, and then I'm going to play what a world leader said about this as well. Genocide Joe from Admiral Kirby.
I said this the other day. Again, people can say what they want on the sidewalk, and we respect that. That's what the First Amendment's about. But this word genocide is getting thrown around in a pretty inappropriate way by lots of different folks. What Hamas wants, make no mistake about it, is genocide. They want to wipe Israel off the map. They've said so publicly, more than one occasion. In fact, just recently. And they've said that they're not going to stop. What happened on the 7th of October is going to happen again and again and again. And what happened on the 7th of October? Murder, slaughter of innocent people in their homes or at a music festival. That's genocidal intentions. Yes, there are too many civilian casualties in Gaza. Yes, the numbers are too high. Yes, too many families are grieving. And yes, we continue to urge the Israelis to be as careful and cautious as possible. That's not going to stop, from the president right on down. But Israel is not trying to wipe the Palestinian people off the map. Israel's not trying to wipe Gaza off the map. Israel's trying to defend itself against a genocidal terrorist threat. So if we're going to start using that word, fine, let's use it appropriately.
Isn't Israel trying to wipe Gaza and the Palestinian people off the map? Not off the face of the earth, but off the map. He must mean the map of what they consider Greater Israel.
Well, as I think I said the last time I was on the show, it's very important to understand that when you look at the language that is being used by Israeli elites today, it is deeply disturbing. And Omer Bartov, who is an Israeli-born historian and a historian who studies the Holocaust, has said that Israel has genocidal intent in Gaza. You want to think about that. He is not saying that Israel is in the process of committing genocide, but based on the language and based on a lot of what is being seen on the battlefield inside of Gaza, he concludes that Israel has genocidal intent. And he, along with a large number of other scholars of the Holocaust, many of whom are Jewish or Israeli, have written a letter to the New York Review of Books that basically makes the same argument. So you want to understand that this is a potentially dangerous situation because the Israelis give evidence that they may spin out of control here. So again, my argument is not that the Israelis are committing genocide at this point in time. I don't think that's true. I think that there's no question that they've engaged in mass murder, but not genocide. And nevertheless, as Bartov says, there is genocidal intent here.
Here's President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa on this very topic yesterday.
The collective punishment of Palestinian civilians through the unlawful use of force by Israel is a war crime. The deliberate denial of medicine, fuel, food, and water to the residents of Gaza is tantamount to genocide.
Does he make the argument that is being made in the region, in the Middle East, by the non-Israelis?
Well, the word genocide is thrown around quite loosely these days by people. I think that he's right that Israel is committing war crimes, and I think that starving the population, the civilian population in Gaza, is clearly a war crime. I think indiscriminately bombing the population in Gaza is a war crime. There's no doubt about that. But I would not describe either one of those acts as genocide. I don't mean to split hairs here, but you have to have a clear definition of what genocide is. And for me, genocide is a policy that is designed to eliminate an entire population, to effectively kill an entire population.
Well, there are members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet who have called for that. I've never heard him call for it.
There's no question about that, that there are Israeli elites who have called for that. And that's why, again, Omer Bartov and other scholars of the Holocaust are worried about genocidal intent. But again, intent is different from actually committing genocide.
But in a world where international law is essentially unenforced or selectively enforced against those who manage to get caught, does it matter if we're talking about war crimes or genocide? We're talking about the slaughter of innocents, civilians.
Well, I think it does matter, because I think genocide is a far worse crime than massacring civilians. I don't want to make light of massacring civilians, and it almost sounds like I'm doing that, but I don't want to make light of it. I don't want to make light of what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. I think it's absolutely horrible, but I don't think it's a genocide at this point in time. I think there is potential for genocide, and I think you have to be very careful here. And that's why I think that people who study the Holocaust, which was clearly a genocide, understand that we're out on the slippery slope here, or the Israelis are out on the slippery slope.
Right.
Of course, Joe Biden is backing them to the hilt. And this is why people are spray painting words like Genocide Joe outside the White House. And he should be aware of what's going on, and he should go to great lengths to make sure we don't slide down that slope.
Here's President Vladimir Putin of Russia at a BRICS conference yesterday with his views on all this.
We call for joint efforts of the international community aimed at de-escalating the situation, a ceasefire, and finding a political solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And the BRICS states and countries of the region could play a key role in this work.
Why is he jumping in on this, Professor Mearsheimer?
It makes eminently good sense diplomatically. He looks like a good guy to the vast majority of people on the planet. We're the ones who look like the bad guys. Both Putin and Xi Jinping understand that blaming the United States for this mess, for causing this mess, and then for not holding back the Israelis and indeed supporting the Israelis damages America's diplomatic position in the world and provides an opportunity for them to enhance Russia and China's diplomatic position.
For all the people that the innocent civilians that the IDF is killing, have they really even made a dent so far into Hamas soldiers, whatever they call themselves, Hamas killers, whatever you want to call them?
I think fighters is a good word.
Okay, fighters, we'll use that word.
Well, I've been thinking hard about this over the past week. I mean, we're 6 weeks into this campaign, and I think the conventional wisdom is that the Israelis are doing quite well, and they're eventually going to solve the problem that they face. I think if you look carefully at the reports in the mainstream media in the United States, this is not true. The Wall Street Journal just had a big piece that said that out of the 30,000 Hamas fighters in Gaza, the Israelis have killed 1,000. Think about that. They've killed 1,000 out of 30,000 after 6 weeks. That's a very small number. Furthermore, it's quite clear that they have not destroyed the tunnel network. This is not to say they haven't destroyed a few tunnels and sealed some openings to some of the tunnels, but there's no evidence they've systematically torn apart the tunnels in northern Gaza. And furthermore, they haven't found any of the people who were captured by Hamas. And that was, a total of 240 people. They haven't found any of them. And the Wall Street Journal was reporting that the Israelis are now getting ready to head down into the southern part of Gaza to deal with Hamas down there. And you say to yourself, well, they've only killed 1,000 out of 30,000 fighters up in the north, and you would assume they started in the north because that was the main area where Hamas was located. And now they're going down into the south. And the journal reports that the IDF believes that going south is going to be even more difficult than the operation in the north. And then you start saying to yourself, what are they going to do? Are they going to bomb southern Gaza the way they bombed northern Gaza? Remember, they forced all of those civilians in northern Gaza to move to southern Gaza. So
Right.
there are a huge number of civilians in southern Gaza. What are they going to do? Launch another punishment campaign? I don't think they can get away with that. And if they do, it will be an act of war that really ends up killing massive numbers of civilians. So I think the Israelis are actually between a rock and a hard place here. I don't think they're in good shape in Gaza. And we haven't even touched on the situation inside of Israel. You want to remember there are 200,000 displaced people inside of Israel. These are 200,000 Israelis. Some from the Lebanon border where Hezbollah is launching attacks, and some from southern Israel where there's the problem involving Gaza. So a lot of displaced people. They've mobilized 350,000 troops. This has to be hurting the economy big time. So I think the Israelis are in a quite bad situation at this point in time, contrary to what is the conventional wisdom.
How many deaths are too many deaths?
Well, I mean, the normal answer to that would be one death.
One.
But I mean, the numbers here are really very high. And this is doing enormous damage to Israel's reputation, and it's doing enormous damage to America's reputation. The idea that you can go in there and, kill this many civilians who are these people are defenseless. And not only are you killing them, you're starving them, and you're preventing humanitarian aid from coming in for the most part. I mean, you occasionally have these lulls where humanitarian aid gets in, but for the most part, very little humanitarian aid is getting in there. This is a situation that I think sickens your average person just watching what's happening.
Here's the Jordanian ambassador to the United States explaining what has happened to field hospitals constructed by the Jordanians and others in southern Gaza to service the large numbers of people that have been chased down there by the bombardment up north.
I understand there was an attack against a field hospital. Yeah. Who carried it out? What happened?
Okay, we have a hospital, a military hospital south of Gaza City, and now we're going to have a second one in the south of Gaza. Now, the one that was struck was, there's a mosque next to the hospital, and the Israeli military bombarded that mosque, and people were running because they were injured, running to the hospital. And as our military people came out to help them, they got also hit. So we had 7 injured, and now they're okay. They've been taken care of. But we do not find it normal that all the hospitals are attacked. We do not find it normal that we're attacking civilians and a collective punishment. This cannot go on, Margaret. This cannot go on.
She makes a very compelling argument, Professor Mearsheimer.
It's impossible to disagree with her. I mean, the Israelis are bombing hospitals. They're bombing ambulances. The evidence is very clear here. And the Israeli response to charges that they're bombing hospitals is that Hamas is located in those hospitals. You remember there's this big hospital, the Shira hospital, where the Israelis maintained that there was a major command post, a major Hamas command post underneath the hospital, and there were Hamas fighters in the hospital, and that was the reason that they were moving in militarily to take over the hospital. Of course, when they got there, they didn't find any Hamas fighters, and the command center that they said was underneath the hospital was not there. And in fact, all they showed that I've seen is a photograph or a video of a opening to what they said was a hole in the ground underneath the hospital that apparently was an entrance to some tunnel. But they could not provide any evidence that this was a major military facility for Hamas. But anyway, if you believe that Hamas fighters are traveling in ambulances and Hamas fighters are locked up in hospitals or schools or mosques, then you can justify to yourself attacking those sites. So I think it's quite clear, and lots of people who are in Gaza are saying this, that there is no safe place. Any place you go, even places that are run by the United Nations, are liable to be attacked.
The Israeli economy is getting clobbered. There are 350,000 formerly productive middle-class workers, lawyers, physicians, school teachers who are now in the reservists and fighting or training to fight, so they're not producing. There are 200,000 displaced Israelis that don't have a place to live and don't have any income. And even the Palestinian laborers who had permission to leave Gaza and come into Israel and do manual labor obviously can't do any of that. How are Hamas's finances looking?
I would just also note to you, Judge, that Israel depends very heavily on tourism. And needless to say, given the circumstances in Israel today, there's not a lot of tourism. So the Israeli economy over the long term is in really bad shape. I mean, this war has been going on for 6 weeks. And as I said before, the Wall Street Journal reports that they've only killed 1,000 out of 30,000 fighters. They still have to finish in the north. And then when they're done in the north, they're going to move to the south. This war is going to go on for a long time. And the economic problems that you described now are just going to grow exponentially over time, one would think. Now, turning to Hamas's finances, right? The Economist has a big story that says Hamas is doing very well in terms of its finances. And if anything, the situation is likely to improve. It's quite clear if you look at the Economist article that the center of that financial empire that you see mentioned in the headline is in Istanbul. And the Turks, in particular, President Erdogan, are very sympathetic to Hamas. And it's quite clear that the Turks are helping Hamas with its finances. And to be honest, the article makes it clear that Hamas doesn't even need much help. It's a very sophisticated operation at the financial level. And as you can tell, if the key financial people are located in Istanbul, it's very hard for the Israelis and for the Americans to do much to shut down Hamas's finances. So in terms of the economic dimension of this war, I think Hamas is doing much better than Israel is doing.
Professor John Mearsheimer, on the late in the afternoon and the day before Thanksgiving, thank you for your insight and thank you for your time. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving holiday with your family, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Happy Thanksgiving to you as well, Judge.
Thank you, Professor. Very much appreciated. Well, we have some surprises for you on Thanksgiving Day and on Friday, and maybe you'll have some surprises for us. Maybe we'll reach that 240,000 that we wanted to reach this weekend. No worries if we don't. Our goal is 250,000 by Christmas, and that's still a month away. From my heart to each of yours, happy Thanksgiving, whether you're in the United States or not. It's a happy time to pause and look at where we are in our lives and in the world. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.